This is Cybersecurity Distilled with Andy Bennett.
Thank you for joining us for the inaugural episode of Cybersecurity Distilled, a show designed to break down the complex problems, concepts, and technologies facing cybersecurity professionals today, while exploring the complex flavors of our favorite distilled spirits. I'm your host, Andy Bennett, and in my day job, I'm the CISO of Apollo Information Systems, and this is a production of Apollo Information Systems. With me today is Adam Perrego from Zscaler, and today we're going to take on the very loaded, pun intended, phrase, zero trust. Today, I'm drinking a fine spirit by Balcones, a Texas-made distillery, a Texas living, breathing, amazing whiskey producer, spelled with a Y, not an EY, that is based roughly about an hour and a half from where I live because I felt that it was appropriate to select a whiskey that I could actually validate and possibly continuously make a trip up there to inspect and sample and control, just like zero trust implies. Adam, what are you drinking?
So I'm drinking this fine artifact from Kentucky. It's called Angel's Envy. There's nothing really exciting about it other than it was one of my preferred choices of what I drink. And it's cheaper than my Jefferson. So,
well, you know, when selecting the tooling, you need to make sure that you're not over investing to get the job done, right?
Yeah. You know, the assets you're protecting, you want to last for a little long time. And honestly, this is probably one of my most valuable assets. So I'm trying to protect this for a good day. Not that this is not a good day.
So Adam has a background in law enforcement and has made the transition about 27 years ago over to IT and security, and has been across the enterprise, has lots of war stories. We may get into some of those today. And I'm really excited to have him here with us as our inaugural guest. One, because we get along great and we're going to have a great conversation. But also two, he has a lot of experience dealing with zero trust in practice as a practical subject. But Adam, tell us a little bit more about your background. Give us some flavor that the pre-canned bios that I have just can't do.
Yeah. So, you know, as you alluded to, I used to be a cop, loved it, thought I was going to live and die as a cop. And, you know, for reasons, I just decided to move into IT.
Well, hold on. Is that siren? Did somebody add that?
I cued this. I cued the siren. Do you like that? Huh?
That's great. See, that could not have been better. Continue.
That's how I roll. So anyway, you know, long story short, my son was born, and I wanted to make more money and make a better life for my family. So I pivoted into IT. And during my time of IT, I pretty much took any project there was or any technology there was just for the sake of learning. I was very hungry and wanted to learn the different tenets of technology, whether it be storage, servers, mail systems, networks, security, telephony, call center, everything. I probably had my hands dirty in at some point. So I always tell people I'm an expert in nothing. I know a little bit about a lot, but the biggest thing is I know how it all interacts with each other, which I think has been a pivotal part of my successful discussions with customers, because there's always a siloed approach to technology. So I've been at Zscaler now for going on about 5.5 years, probably the longest gig I've ever done. I currently started out as a SLED SE, so I focused on pretty much the entire nation from a systems engineering perspective. I've moved up to a current role, which is called a solutions architect, where I talk about architecture and transformation with a lot of emphasis on zero trust these days, because obviously with the latest COVID thing, you know, it forced a lot of people to think very differently in terms of what they were doing before versus to be agile and nimble to what they're dealing with now. And not only now, but in the future, since this has become more of an adaptive mobile workforce, so to speak. So that's me. I like shooting. I love bourbon. I like fast cars. I have an 1,100 horsepower truck. That's about
1,100 horsepower truck. So that's a diesel.
Mm-mm.
No.
Nope. That is a Ram TRX.
Oh, you bought the T-Rex.
And I blew it up.
Oh, that's outstanding.
But
I didn't realize it was 1,100 horsepower. Did you do something to it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I blew it up. And
well,
yeah,
Directly before blowing it up.
Yeah, I put too much boost in it. Yeah, and I put too much boost in it, leaned it out too much, and it literally melted one of my pistons. And I had a stroker motor built by this ex-NASCAR outfit out of Virginia, and they actually have it right now. They're tuning it, so it's going to put out about 1,100 horsepower at the crank and about 920 at the wheels. So
that's a lot of truck.
It is. It's a lot of fun.
I bet it is. I like fast cars too, but I don't have anything like that. I'm risk averse in that regard. I don't really modify my cars. I respect the hell out of people who are willing to sacrifice their warranty to get what they want. And that's just a risk trade-off, right?
It most certainly is. Yeah. If you're willing to roll the dice and risk it, it could be okay for you, or you can have this outcome.
Or that could happen. That's right. I wasn't expecting to get an automotive metaphor for cybersecurity and risk management out of this discussion, but there it is right there in practice. You said something while you were talking that I keyed in on, and I think it's going to make a nice segue to actually get to talking about zero trust. And that is the term expert. I'm not an expert in anything, but have you ever actually met a true cybersecurity expert who was an expert in everything cybersecurity?
No.
Because I haven't, right? And every time I hear somebody say, I'm an expert in blah, 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 I don't care what they're talking about. Something raises on the back of my neck and I'm like, are you really? Because if you work in the field I work in, the thing you're an expert in changed yesterday.
Oh, yes. Yeah. At one point, so in my evolution of my career, I took a lot of certifications and I had a lot of acronyms to my name, which ended in expert. But that was only as good the second that they plugged into the computer before they printed it. And then it was just a waste. It was gone.
Right.
It's invalid.
I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but I've got a broad IT background too. And I think, and I credit that knowing how all the pieces fit together to being pivotal to my success, but also because it gave me a fantastic bullshit filter.
Yes.
And being able to filter out when somebody is just talking out of the side of their mouth versus actually knows what they're talking about and is exploring the real issues we're facing has been absolutely invaluable.
Well, I think, Andy, when you talk to anybody, whether it's a vendor, partner, consultant, peer, somebody that's at a trade show that had a little too much to drink that's running his mouth, you can pretty much detect the BS within the first 3 minutes.
Well, you and I can. How do we root it out though? Because the people who have only been in the field for a couple of years, especially, we are now in, and I had no idea where this is. These are going to be completely unscripted shows, by the way.
Awesome.
We live in an era now that a group of people are coming up and entering the field with degrees in the field. When you and I were in college and getting our education in both hard knocks and academia, there was no such thing, right? We stumbled into security. We got shoved into security. We found security, or it found us in some way. It wasn't something that we could go to school and get a degree in. And I was just talking with somebody else earlier today about how these folks come out and they don't have the same breadth of knowledge that we have about what the enterprise is, how it works, and how all the pieces fit together. And so how do we enable and empower those guys to build their bullshit filters and skirt around all the people selling snake oil?
Sure. So, snake oil salesmen it was all about how they position things. So as you may know already, I like to use a lot of analogies, right?
Yep,
so
me too.
First thing, never think anybody's an expert. I don't care what they say or what they do. They're not an expert in anything in particular, because like we've talked about, their expertise in any given thing is limited based upon, number one, their experience, number two, their working knowledge. But that doesn't transcend into a full expertise of all things, of any scenario or any integration or anything, because at the end of the day, there's nobody an expert. The most complicated careers in this world, would you say, would be like a doctor, right? That's a pretty safe thing. What do doctors do? They practice. Practice.
And then depending on where that practice leads them, they specialize, right?
But they specialize, but there's still a practice. And that practice is implying what they do, because no two scenarios could be identical, right? Just because somebody has these symptoms doesn't necessarily mean it equates to the same issue. or the same treatment or the same mitigation. Everything is different, and it differs based upon, and keeping in the mantra of the healthcare industry, it depends on comorbidities, it depends on genetic deficiencies, stuff like that. So that's why it's a practice. You can't go in, I can't go in, like if there was two of us, you and I went to the same doctor and said, hey, we got runny noses. We don't have the same thing.
Yeah, you might have a cold, I might have allergies. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. So when you're talking to people and try to decipher through the BS, first off, I find, and this was a sixth sense that I acquired when I was a cop, because, being a police officer, you deal with so many different people in so many different walks of life and so many different geospectrums and educational and whatever, is first off, let the person talk, right? Because they're going to mess something up. Second off, if they come at you with things like buzzwords that are marketing that you're hearing on mainstream, like, if you're talking to somebody, well, I want to do zero trust, and you really don't know what that means, I will bet money that probably 65% of those, they don't know what it means either. So they put things like zero trust or zero trust architecture or SASE or SSE or ZTNA. And these are Gartner marketing things that people will gravitate towards and use as buzzwords to present themselves as something as to present themselves at a higher level than what they would originally be.
Well, even zero trust was a Forrester word.
Right.
Yeah. So now I will say, for SASE, zero trust, and lots of those other things, even CASB is one of these, right? Mm-hmm. One of these things that the term got coined and then people started running with it. I'm a CASB. No, you're not a CASB. I'm a CASB. But I don't find an actual flaw with the seminal works that back and underpin each one of these things. The flaw is in when the marketects get a hold of it.
Yes.
The marketecture, when the buzzword engine gets into full swing, that's when it happens. Because SASE includes zero trust network architecture as a component, right? They expect you, but it's a component of an overall thing, not a single solution. There isn't a single SASE solution. There isn't a single zero trust solution. But there's this. I think Gartner has that curve, that wave of adoption and stuff like that. I think that maybe it's time that they also have a similar chart next to it of when they expect the buzzwords to filter out and practice to filter in, right? Yeah. So which brings us nicely into the heavily loaded. Let's get a little more loaded. Cheers.
Salute.
Term that is zero trust. You brought it up first, and I guess I brought it up first because I mentioned it in the intro, but is zero trust, what's the biggest BS claim you've heard anyone make around using the word zero trust as a buzzword?
My firewalls can do zero trust.
My firewalls, you heard, wow.
That is 99% of the initial feedback, that my firewalls can do zero trust because they can. Yeah.
Just for the audience, no, they cannot. Firewalls cannot do zero trust. Firewalls can be included as a telemetry point and a possible enforcement point in a zero trust architecture, but firewalls cannot do zero trust. That's a pretty good one. I was expecting something along the lines of my solution can make you zero trust across your entire solution set and enterprise in every possible way, no matter what kind of infrastructure you have, which is also.
That's a vendor's perspective. So that's pretty much a vendor coming up to you and selling that. I was referring from a customer where you're getting those debates of like, well, we're doing
that's a great differentiator. What other customer claims when you come in and you say, have you explored or where are you on your zero trust journey? Because I expect that's kind of how you approach it, knowing you. What other pushback do you get from your customers that I'm sure members in our audience can relate to?
We're cloud hosted, so everything is in the cloud, and we provide all access through our environment, and which we have layers of access controls to those environments. So it's always talked about of what they have today and how that really is And to a certain extent, that may be accurate and maybe certain tenets of what comprises zero trust, but in the reality of things, the way it's deployed, the manner in which it's configured is not. And there's always the misperception or misconception of what zero trust is versus what they have. There's a huge delta, right? I hear it's cloud hosted. I've got an IDP to handle all that. I've got a front end sandbox that's front ending all of my application access. So I'm doing reverse proxies. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. We've got multi-factor authentication enabled, so we're protecting that. So it's a myriad of things, but quite candidly, everybody gravitates towards a firewall from a customer's perspective. They really believe because you're stacking all of these features and functions on a physical box that might be from an untrusted point of a network to a user's access. What they don't realize.
Okay, so here's the problem, and I think I'm going to channel the Zero Trust seminal author. I've mentioned his name already once, John. Right? This is my channeling. I hope he sees this. I had the pleasure of listening to a discussion with John just last month, actually, about what zero trust is actually intended to be, right? And he has a whole lot of really good insights that I haven't heard a lot of people use. So John uses this very interesting picture, and it's a picture of the Secret Service guarding a presidential motorcade. And he says that the principles of zero trust are completely on display in this picture. And he highlights, and in the background, there's Secret Service members, and he points to them in his presentation. There's Secret Service members over here. There's Secret Service members here. And there's also Secret Service members right next to the cars, walking with the cars. Mm-hmm. We don't actually know which car the president is in. A presidential motorcade has lots of cars, mm-hmm. right? Lots of limos. And we also, but what we can see is that part of the detail is on standby and or theater. So the guys in the background, their hands are out of their pockets, their coats are buttoned up because it's a little cold, and they are away from the motorcade. They're in the audience and they're watching. And they even highlighted somebody, I think, out in the crowd, but they're mm-hmm. right at the audience and they're looking. That's where all the noise is. They don't have a lot to do. They just keep pace and they walk. You look down here and you got somebody who's walking in the front of the motorcade, and he's looking down the road, and he is keeping an eye on what's coming, but he also has his coat buttoned up. But then you look farther back at the ones who are walking right at the car. You want to know which car the president is in? Look for the one where people's coats are unbuttoned and their hands are near their waist while they walk. And that is in his mind, the quintessential approach to zero trust being that you put the controls and continuous validation as close to the asset as possible. And that way, the other day, you and I had a conversation. We talked about the squishy center. You get rid of the squishy center and the controls are right there.
Yes.
And it was the most beautiful presentation or succinctly put illustration of what zero trust should be. We anthropomorphize. Trust is an emotion. And you said trusted network place. So there is no such thing as a trusted network. Trust is an emotion. Trust is something that we put into people. And so we've anthropomorphized our networks and our computers because why should we be trusting them? They are things. Mm-hmm. And that was the key point after this. It was the next slide after the motorcade. And the mistake that we make is instead of having confidence or being able to rely on technology, we trust it. Mm-hmm. You can trust people. You can also have distrust of people, but you can't measure trust. You can measure confidence. How confident am I that system is okay? How confident am I that our network is all right? And if you just make the assumption that you can't be confident in those things, then you start to look at how you control those. And then you move back to people, just identity in general. And this is where he draws the connection back to zero trust as an identity centric, as an identity, people and entity centric operation. It was a fantastic presentation. So in your mind, hopefully everything I just said was as clear as mud, but why don't people get that? Why did I have to wait 11 years and wade through 11 years of marketing and buzzwords and interpretations of people who have literally never read a single zero trust document by an authoritative author or researcher to get down to that distillation of the concept?
I think, especially in SLED, if you think of the everyday operational aspect of SLED, the folks I meet are people that actually turn the wrenches, do their thing, and 90% of the time they're overwhelmed. And then in a lot of cases, it's hard to get that ubiquitous strategic view over the organization let alone from a state level, let alone from an agency perspective, because everybody's doing their own thing. And then because they're so busy, that the technology changes and evolves every day, right? So it's hard for somebody to be running down the road and having to stop and figure out how the road is mapped with everybody else. Everybody's just doing their job, doing their thing. And it's hard to get that bigger picture view because, quite candidly, most of my customers are overworked. They're doing engineering and operations at the same time. And the priority is whatever the priority is of the day. It is very hard to figure out or take a stop and breathe to figure out what zero trust would look like in their environment or what components could be leveraged to get them to that point. And only do they realize that lack of doing that, it's too late because they've been compromised, or it's too late because now they all have this screen flashing on their, like the city of Atlanta, splashing on their display saying, danger, danger, Will Robinson, send me $20 million. It's too late at that point. And I think
it's way too late.
Yeah. And I think it's unfortunately a legacy behavior of, and to a certain extent, I don't want to mean ignorant in the sense of people are ignorant. They're not. But again, when you're doing your job for the day, people, SLED hires like system analysts. This is your thing. This is what you do. That's all you do. That's what I hired you for. And that's what you're going to do and focus on. So this person's going to be the best at what they can do if in the field in which you're in the lane that they're swimming. They're going to be the best at it. But a lot of times the collaboration is just not there. So when you get folks like you were, like a CISO or something like that to try to bring it together, that takes time and coordination to try to get that collaboration and just a general understanding of what this really means. Now, situations
so much time can confirm.
Yeah. So what we're doing here and the ability to have outreaches and educational processes and literally distilling the concept of vendor A coming in and saying, hey, we can solve your zero trust problems. You have to understand what that really means for you, because every organization is different, very similar to the fact that you already knows and I've already knows. No two agencies are the same. Everybody does things a little different. But it just takes the time to research what that really means. So we always transcend ourselves to like the 800-207 model, right? So when say they wrote the guidance, and that's great. Just like a college degree, this is a framework.
Yep.
This framework is a foundation of what thou shall or should do and not do. But how that doesn't fit in your organization like this. It doesn't cleanly plug into your organization. Every organization is unique, so you have to plug in where those grooves exist. Right?
Well, what I latched onto in what you just said is something that is probably going to be the best tidbit of this entire discussion. And that is that you have to ask what it means for you, which means that you're not asking what zero trust means to them, right? Don't ask the vendor, what does zero trust mean to you?
Right.
Ask them, what does your approach mean to me?
That's right.
What implications does it have in my systems? Does it solve my pain? How does it enable my business? Ask those questions of your vendors, and that's when you will figure out. I think we just found our snake oil filter.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, right
so
there.
Cheers to that
question. Cheers.
Yes. So yeah, it's since you gave me some clout, I work for Zscaler, and there's a couple things that stand out what we do differently. And when customers are like, well, how are you different than this person? How are you different than this person? From a technical perspective, there's one thing that always resonates with me is in what we do SSL inspection at scale, meaning you could send me 1 gig one day and I'll decrypt it, inspect it, and process the line rate. And the next day you could send me 10 gig and you have the same user experience. So when customers are in this type of, debate about what can you do in comparison to what they know, I always say, ask your next vendor that same question and see what that answer is. Because I think it's important because they're going to get two different perspectives, but the BS will come to the surface pretty quick when you start asking these questions. It really will. And
absolutely.
People should not be afraid because, feelings are irrelevant as it relates to a vendor to consumer model.
And it's not personal. I want everybody to know that that's not personal. And if you are dealing with a vendor who takes that personally, speaking as a person who has been on both sides of the fence, if you're dealing with a vendor who takes that personally, that's going to be indicative of the relationship you will have with that vendor if you decide to go with them. It's not personal. Right. Business is business, and zero trust needs to get you what you need, or you shouldn't go with that vendor and approach.
Exactly.
Right? Zero trust is an approach. There is no panacea. There is no one silver bullet for everybody. It doesn't exist. But if zero trust solves the pain and you find a vendor that can do it, maybe it's Zscaler and maybe it's not. You find somebody who can
cog in that wheel. There's a lot more than just us.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing, right? We talked about that earlier, right? Vendors who come in and say, we are zero trust. No, they're not. If they say we are a part or we enable your approach to zero trust, they're starting to use the right words. So ask those questions. What does their approach to supporting zero trust mean to you and your organization, and how does it support you in achieving your goals? And now that's another problem though, right? You have to actually understand your goals. You can't just say, I want to be secure. Well, everybody wants to be secure, but do you actually want to do what it takes to be secure? Because you could just take that thing out back, bury it in concrete, unplug it, and leave it there, and it is absolutely secure, but it's useless. So nobody can use it, right? That's not an approach that anybody takes. That's a time capsule you just built. Somebody else is later on going to come in, dig it up, and then exploit the data. Who knows? So time capsules are not good security because they don't allow for business to happen, and all they're doing is delaying the compromise by hundreds of years. But also being completely wide open absolutely ensures you're going to be hit and breached and torn apart, eviscerated, possibly with existential consequences. So it's all about risk management and balance. And that's something that I don't think gets enough credence. I want to pivot because I have a question for you, Zscaler you.
Okay. How
do you, Zscaler you, enable your customers, most of whom you already said are the wrench turners, but you also deal with non-wrench turners. So how do you enable the non-wrench turners to get above and message in a way that illustrates to executives who are not technical, who are beyond the CIO? How do we get them to sign off on the money that it takes to add these solutions? You're not a cheap solution, and nobody who plays in your space is a cheap solution.
Right.
How do we message that?
So, barring the underlying architecture, which in some cases it can be more complex than others, the idea is keeping it simple as possible operationally, because quite honestly, there's more vulnerabilities in a poorly orchestrated operations model than there is in a technical solution, right? So, talking to the folks that are the CFO, C-level folks, it's really about enabling a business and organization to do what they need to do in such a manner where there's a decoupling of trust from devices to actual assets, databases, and things like that. So literally to go to kind of dovetail on what you were mentioning earlier about the trust model, right? And trust is a human emotion versus a machine
versus confidence that can be measured,
right? Is to really gravitate towards that when people are accessing your critical assets or accessing resources that that are fundamentally part of your business, is to ensure that they're identified and validated who they are, right? That your resources are not acceptable to or accessible to anybody else other than the person that is identified, authenticated, authorized, with separation from the end user to the asset, right? With a control point in the middle, and I don't mean a firewall, but a control point in the middle, which would be inclusive of a variety of pieces. Now, that probably wasn't a good answer for a CEO. An IO may get that, but a CEO, a CIO, his job's on the line if they have an outage or if they get hit by ransomware. First off, the CISO is gone, and the CIO is probably next. So it's a hard question to answer.
It is.
For me, it's really decoupling technology from the user, right? And enabling a user to access resources, provided they say they are, and in a manner that is not exposing your asset to threats or ransomware attacks or anything like that.
Well, I was hoping you had a formula, because there's a lack of formula in this space, because it's a space where one size fits one. And
Yes.
the key there is understanding in the SLED space, which, just in case the audience didn't pick up, is state, local, and educational customers. There are other circles, they call it SLTT, state, local, education is included in local, tribal, and territorial government, right? It's the public sector, excluding federal government. But they speak in terms of mission. So the state police in every state, their mission is public safety.
Yes.
The Health and Human Services in every state has very specific guidelines. The licensing and regulation, Department of Transportation, that's another one that's in every state. I don't know if licensing and regulation is a discrete agency in every state, but transportation is. Mm-hmm. And so the Department of Transportation in every agency, they have a very specific mission to roads and infrastructure. And so if you're going to message in the SLED space, you have to speak to the mission. You have to talk about how improving the cybersecurity and information security controls contributes to public safety, health and human services, and all the missions that they encompass, or the improvement and maintenance and smooth operation of roads and critical infrastructure.
Right.
You have to figure out how to enable your message, whether it's pushing zero trust or any other IT and cybersecurity concept, in a way that shows that you are focused on the mission. The same exact thing is true in enterprise, because I work in enterprise and SLED and Fed. The same exact thing is true in enterprise, and that is that you have to take the time to understand the business that they're in, right? It's not the public service mission, it's the business. It's doubtful if you're on the enterprise side that they're running a charity, so they need to make money to live, right? They need to make money to pay their people. They need to make money to deliver their product. They need to make money to conduct business as a whole. How they conduct business is going to vary. The thing they have in common is money. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have to tie it into revenue in some way, whether it's cost avoidance, whether it's cost savings, whatever it is, right? But you also have to understand their business to really get the message across. And that is, you have to, if they make a widget, you have to understand before you go in what the processes are from the creation of the widget, the packaging of the widget, the distribution of the widget, the receiving payment for the widget, all the way through to the reporting to the board about our entire widget activities.
Right.
You have to understand that to be able to explain where the solution we're asking to implement fits in the ecosystem within that business, right? You have to speak business or mission. Otherwise, you are not going to win. You're not going to get the money you asked for. Now, there is a unicorn here, which is where an informed executive, a CEO, a COO, or a board of directors, is watching the news, pays enough attention, Googles just enough where they come to you and they say, are we doing this? And you say, no, it's really expensive and we haven't had the budget. And they say, don't let budget be a problem. We need to be secure.
Right.
That's a unicorn. It does happen, but it's a unicorn. You have to learn to speak business or mission and mission to be able to get your message across.
And that's a good point. So you're asking you originally, and I want to kind of
Go
come
for
back
it.
to that question. So you originally asked me a question of a CIO. So in I have been living, breathing SLED for a very long time and supported, quite honestly, a lot of enterprises and private sector folks. Now, I will tell you, and you having been part of Texas, every state that I've worked with, they fundamentally have the same kind of construct, meaning, I would say the answer to that would be centric to the agency in which you're talking to versus the overarching OIT who you're talking to, right? So let's take, for example, if I'm talking to DHS, there's a lot of variables that you have to be concerned with as it relates to zero trust, right? So let's take the basic bread and butter of things, right? Processing Medicare claims. How do they get the data from A to B? Who's accessing that data? What about PII, PHI? And then you go to the DOT side, right? They have their own set of guidelines and regulations, the integration with the Fed, talking to them over their systems. And then, excuse me, then you have the Treasury, right? Treasury or finance, and that transcends down to actually the agencies themselves, where they're worried about IRS 1075 and regulations to that. Public safety, it's about public safety, but I will tell you, in absence of officer safety, public safety doesn't exist.
Absolutely.
So when we talk, and I'm a biased guy because I did a decade as a cop, public safety, it's really, when we talk to those type of constituents, it's really about the officer's accessibility to data securely, the ability not to have that data be leaked and to make sure, and honestly, cops or anybody in the public sector field or public safety field, they can be dodgy in the late hours of the night because they're bored, so to make sure that what they're accessing is and they're protected, right? So from a SLED perspective, it's not really a CO thing. I've noticed a lot over the states that they've kind of changed by legislation the structure of government, where they're doing an Office of IT, which has a centralized CIO, and every agency has their own, and there's only organizations within there. So if we're talking to the CIO of the state, that's kind of a different conversation than if we're talking to the CIO of agriculture, right? Because they may have other things that they need, or the CIO of public safety or whatever.
Yep.
So I guess I was just trying to give myself a little bit of leeway from not being able to answer your question.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. Right. Well, but I'm glad you did, because it brought us around to another point that I've heard made myself many times, which is mission always comes first. And that's why I didn't explain why you have to speak mission, but it's because mission always comes first. Business always comes first. If a police department, since you're using police departments, if a police department has a choice between bulletproof vests and computers,
I'll take a vest.
I'll take a vest is the answer, right? If I have to choose between the two, because because nobody could articulate to me why the computer mattered, right? Even though our cars are now so computerized that it matters, our distribution system, communication systems are so computerized that it matters, and cybersecurity is officer safety. Mm-hmm. But if you can't articulate that, I'll take a vest.
Right. So, I think this kind of goes back to the conversation with the vendor. Do they sell a vest or do they sell something else? Mm-hmm. Anybody can sell you a vest. It doesn't take much selling to do it or proving it. I mean, hey, you've got a vest and here's a 308 going into a class 3, vest with a plate. That's easy. But really is understanding and translating.
That's statistical sampling and validation right there.
That's easy. Yeah. It's really the vendor to be able to understand what you do for a living and who you serve, which rolls up to the mission.
And how they support it.
Yes.
I think that is a great place to start our wrap up here. Mm-hmm. So, because it turns out we talked a lot longer than I think.
Sorry about that. I talk a lot.
Me as well. And so I think, let's see, I'm checking my agenda here because I tried to be organized for this. And I think this is where I ask you, where can people find you? What do you do? And give us your closing thoughts on zero trust and removing the BS. Getting it distilled.
Absolutely. So as mentioned, I'm Adam Perrego. I work for Zscaler. I'm a solutions architect. So I pretty much support SLED in general. I can be reached at a Perrego, Aperrego, at zscaler.com. I will answer to anybody. I will tell everybody that my SLA for sobriety ends at 6. So if you send me an email at 9, I'm just saying. But I'm here to help out anybody's questions. Even if I'm not the local coverage person, I will put you in touch with the right person. But we at Zscaler believe in zero trust, which again takes a lot of forms, and we're a part of that. There are other things involved other than just us, but we have a comprehensive set of security solutions, not only for the cloud, from the user, and from application protection as well. So.
Well, Adam, thanks for being my first guest and helping me kick this thing off. I hope it's a lot of fun moving forward, but I definitely had fun with the first one, and I appreciate you, buddy. Cheers.
Thanks for the plug. Cheers to you, my friend, and I hope you have a great weekend.
You as well. I'm Andy Bennett, Apollo CISO, and this has been Cybersecurity Distilled and is a production of Apollo Information Systems. You can find me at apollo-is.com. We're on all the social media. If you happen to be on Facebook, we're there. We're a lot more active on LinkedIn, and we've got a great YouTube channel you should check out. Just search for Apollo Information Systems. And until next time, let's raise a glass to preparedness and resilience. Stay vigilant.
Stay thirsty, my friends.